again, friends. We're back with Concert Conversations, and we're so grateful that you're able to join us today, especially today because we get to have some of our featured soloists with us, and it's very exciting, and I can't wait to introduce them to you. For starters, I will tell you that they are Jannina Norpoth and Tommy Mesa, and they are part of the Sphinx Quartet, and we're going to get into that in just a moment, and they're going to present some music for us that we've never had in the Quad Cities before. So it's very, very exciting. But of course, we're also joined by the music director of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra, Mark Russell Smith. And Maestro, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for all that you do.
Well, it's an honor. And before we get to our very special guests, I'd like to set the table, if we may. You've put together an amazingly thoughtful program. And the way everything is clicking together, in my mind, it's very, very exciting. But tell us a little bit about the work that our guests will be joining and how that fits in the overall picture. And then we're going to drag them into the conversation.
Right. Well, as you know, this entire season has, as planned, you know, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, everything changed. And so what I desperately tried to do as we presented our smaller versions of Masterworks was to keep as many of the same composers, keep the same themes, but obviously we had to downsize, you know, just the size of the orchestra. And so the original Masterworks VI was made to celebrate and to work hand in hand with the Figge's American exhibit. And for our guests, the Figge Museum is this incredible museum in downtown Davenport, and really has fantastic stuff. And we collaborate often when they have a show coming in. You know, we try to collaborate and make it kind of a citywide festival, and so they have Americans. It's an American show, all American show, and so our Masterworks VI was what I was calling an American tapestry. And so I made a symphony of a 4-movement symphony, but each movement was by a different composer, and a different American composer. And so we had an opener, we had a closer, we had a slow movement. Anyway, so the American tapestry idea. And we had a commission actually by Jacob Banks originally, I think, on this program as well, our wonderful local composer with Ricardo Morales, the clarinetist. Anyway, so it was a wonderful American tapestry type program. And so we kept that same theme, but now we have to work within the realities of all the COVID protocols. And so that means smaller orchestras. That means, you know, fitting everybody on stage socially distanced, blah, blah, blah. So, but luckily there's a lot of great work for smaller forces, and the idea of the tapestry can work kind of in a little bit different way than I originally had. And so to have the work of Michael ABELS, to have Gabriella, Elena Frank, living composers, and then to have just like these iconic Americans, Charles Ives and Aaron Copland, I think made for a nice tapestry. And now to have these guys as our soloists, you know, in the ABELS, it even better. I mean, the tapestry is even more rich, and, you know, to have young, incredible artists like these guys. And so anyway, that's the idea. We've kind of, as we have all year, you know, we've been able to explore different repertoire, and it's been incredibly rewarding. You know, instead of Brahms' Third Symphony, we did the Brahms Serenade. And so it's like, you never get to do that. And so that was cool, you know. And anyway, so we've you know, made the best out of the situation, and actually, you know, turned some corners and opened some doors that of repertoire that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so in that way, this program, you know, it very much reflects the original idea of the American tapestry. And now it's just with a different kind of tapestry, which I love.
Well, let's meet these weavers you're talking about of this tapestry. And so I'll go in alphabetical order. Let's begin with Tommy Mesa, who is cellist with the Sphinx Quartet. And we're going to meet your counterpart in just a moment. But because you're new to many of us in the audience, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your sojourn in music as a calling, as something you do for your life's work.
So you want me to go summarize my whole career?
Yeah,
2 minutes.
Or 2 minutes. You know how it goes.
Go.
Just the highlights.
Yeah. So, you know, mainly I'm a soloist. Mainly that's really my bread and butter, recitalist. And I do a lot of chamber music as well. Like I really enjoy that. And of course, with this quartet, we actually have a lot of fun as an ensemble, and this piece is also really fun. So I love doing this kind of work. I do a lot of that in my own life, and but mostly it's just solo stuff. So recitals, you know, I did the normal, like, you know, conservatory undergrad, and then I wanted to have a more, I guess, like, quote unquote normal experience. So I went to Northwestern for my master's, and yeah, and so came back to New York City, and as you can hear, I'm in New York City right now, and it is very loud. That is all the time. I live next to a hospital, which is kind of intense. But I've been here for 6 years, and I use it as a base to travel, sort of like take a bus to LaGuardia, go on my way, and come back. It's kind of a nice process until a year ago. But this experience is really, really fun. To be able to come to Davenport and play with Quad City. I'm really excited for it. And the recording this whole year has been really interesting. Like, there's so many recording projects going on, and we're allowed to sort of grow as artists, because while we all have our separate recording projects, probably not nearly as much as it is this year. And recording has been such a like microscopic, like, you really focus on what's going on, like, in micro ways. And so it's really a growing experience for all of us artists. So we're really excited.
Well, and we're very excited to have you with us, and just stay close because we're coming back to you in a minute or two. But Jannina Norpoth, our violinist, please, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Tell us a little bit, because I know you made your debut with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra at the age of 14, so late bloomer. But please tell us a little bit about your journey to finding that music was going to be the calling of your life.
Sure. Well, my dad is a jazz musician. I grew up in Detroit. That's my hometown, even though I've been in New York for quite a long time now. But I used to watch him rehearse all the time. He was constantly, he was very involved producing concerts in Detroit and always bringing guest artists in. They would rehearse at my house. So I started when I was 2, and my parents asked me if I wanted to play an instrument. And I was obsessed with the double bass. I mean, naturally, as a 2-year-old, the double bass is probably the most impressive instrument you can imagine. So I didn't even know what a violin was at the time. And I told them I wanted to play the double bass like Richard Davis, who's a fabulous jazz bassist. And they thought that was absolutely hilarious. And they said they'd get me a little bass, which turned out to be the violin. They lied. And it stuck. I still play the violin. And I've sort of made a very eclectic career for myself. Most of the time I play in an ensemble called Public Quartet, which does a lot of improvisation. Our programming kind of combines living composers, underrepresented composers, and it's very socially conscious, and kind of combines my upbringing in the world of jazz with my classical conservatory training. And also I love music in general. I play in a rock band with my husband, and so the quartet, through improvisation, we've really been able to sort of like combine all of our musical passions into sort of one stage that still sounds a little bit something like classical music. So there you go.
Well, hold that thought about improvisation. But Tommy, I was just wondering, and maybe you're both welcome to answer this, but how does one get involved with the Sphinx organization? I mean, how did you guys get invited into this collaboration?
So I'm actually fairly new to the Sphinx organization, like relatively. I think, Jannina, how long have you been involved? It's been many years, right?
It'll date me if I tell you, but I did.
Yeah, let's not talk about it.
Well, but Sphinx started as a competition, and now it's I mean, national and almost international organization. But I did the very first competition in the 90s, and I've been involved with many of their initiatives since then, as a member of the Sphinx Symphony, as a member of the Sphinx Virtuosi, which is a conductless chamber orchestra, which is actually sort of how we all, this ensemble came together. I've taught at their summer program for 15 years. And most recently, I've been in a cohort called Sphinx Lead, which is arts administrators of color, and that was sort of driven by my own need to have a quartet function like a business, and needing to know that to kind of to embark upon the opportunities that we really wanted. So so Sphinx has been a very influential organization in my life, and has also really sort of opened my eyes to the importance of artistry and belonging, especially when teaching at their summer program, and really seeing the impact of when you embrace students of color and you make a place for them within classical music, and you see how they carry that with them when they leave the program. And touring with Sphinx Virtuosi too, really, we'd play at Carnegie Hall, and there'd be, the traditional audience alongside so many students that they would bring in, and they'd see this orchestra of Black and Latinx people on stage. And I've never felt like more of a rock star in my life. Like the standing ovations and there's the cheers from this crowd, and you recognize, really what the need is to diversify our classical spaces.
Well, okay, I'm going to throw this question out to all of you before we come back into the music. But a big part of this is you mentioned social justice. I mean, that's an aspect of this, and of course, in the last year, we've begun to explore where equity fits into conversations in every facet of life, not just in terms of public administration, government, and all this kind of thing, but really everywhere. So I'm just wondering if anyone would care to comment on the role of not just the Sphinx organization, but the National Alliance for Audition Support, of which the QCSO is a part, in addressing that situation, Jannina, that you brought up, and making audiences, but also ensembles more closely resemble the society of which they're part, right? So I don't know, Tommy, is that part of what drew you to this opera gig, or?
Sorry, say that again. What was the last?
Is that part of what drew you to this gig, or with Sphinx?
Yeah, I mean, so I got involved with them. This was like, I think 5 years ago at this point, and from it is just a big family, and I just love that about it. And what they stand for is just so important, which is just involving as many voices as possible across the entire population. Like we have so many new pieces to discover, and while we all love Beethoven and Brahms and the typical pieces, these are all masterworks that will always be great, but there are so many more voices in our community, and there's so many more voices that are phenomenal. Like if you look at this piece by Michael ABELS that you're going to hear, I mean, it's so fun. Like it just exudes energy and joy. I mean, there's like a bluesy section in the middle, and then there's a hoedown later on. And he's just, when he was working with us in person, he was just like, I need you guys to just have a great time, and that's just such an amazing thing. Like Beethoven is so different, right? Like yes, there's joy in it. There's sort of ecstasy in a lot of this music, but it's different, right? And I just love how, so many organizations right now are pairing important works that are all great in their own regards, but pairing them together in a way that like really complement each other. So we're in a great world right now, as far as like people waking up to the fact that there's more than just this canon, and that's been for many years now, but more so in the last, like you were saying, like in the last year, I think people have really sort of had this reckoning of like really time to think about what they stand for, how they're standing for it, and how that sort of comes through their programming.
Well, and Maestro, we've been letting you off the hook here pretty much, but I want to get you in on this. They tell us a little bit about how this aspect of the conversation is what encourages you to bring Michael ABELS back to us, but also to introduce us to Gabriella Elena Frank.
Right.
Yeah. So how does that help with the program?
Well, look, I mean, in a weird way, and I alluded to this a little earlier, in a weird way, we've all had to rethink this year and the whole repertoire. And so the classical music business is so structured and so planned. And like, I know 4 years from now what I'm doing on April 23rd, and it's like so weird and crazy in that way. that now being forced to all of a sudden rethink was like fantastic in a way. And so you could explore different avenues of the repertoire and very importantly program things that have been underprogrammed or composers that have been underrepresented. ABELS, for me, of course, I mean, it's a long story. It is literally a long story because like we were second grade classmates in Phoenix, Arizona, wow. Michael ABELS and I, cool. And we sang in the Phoenix Boys Choir together, and we went to high school together. And
what?
Tommy, yeah, I know, man, I know. This is news. I mean, he and I were exactly the same age. He's one of my dearest friends since literally second grade. Wow. And so I have goosebumps actually, because he's just such an amazing guy and such an immensely talented guy. Actually, I'm a cellist also, Tommy. And
oh, nice.
And a reason why I'm a cellist, and I'm not lying, is because in second grade, like I played piano. Both my parents were musicians and I played piano. And I was the best pianist in second grade until Michael ABELS came into the class. He moved from South Dakota. And all of a sudden, there was somebody who played piano better than I did. And it really pissed me off. And so I said, okay, forget that. I'm going to go. So I chose the cello. So like starting in third grade, I chose the cello. And it's not a lie to say that one of the motivating factors of why I'm a cellist now is because Michael ABELS was a good pianist and he came in second grade.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
It's crazy how these things happen.
It is.
And the fact that you go back with someone who's on this programming that you've been close to for so many years.
Exactly. And so we've commissioned him in quad. Every youth orchestra I've conducted, we've commissioned him. And the one of the few pieces I haven't done is Delights and Dances. So
great.
Yeah. And so he was at USC, his undergrad was USC. And so for his composition recital and for my senior recital at Juilliard, he wrote a cello sonata.
Oh,
and
kidding?
No, and a lot of the opening of Delights and Dances, the whole kind of ruminating thing and with the open string, it's like exactly out of, I mean, he and I talked.
I'm gonna have to check that out. That's exciting.
I mean, I think he disavows that piece. I think it's one of those like, oh, that sucks now. But it's like it's scordatura, and it's like so hard. Oh my god!
He's gonna hate you because I'm probably gonna end up playing it a lot.
But I told him, you should, Mike. You should and I'm not supposed to call him Mike. Sorry, Michael. You're supposed, you should redo the sonata because I love the work. It's super thorny. It's really hard, man. I worked my butt off on it, but it's a cello sonata and the piano part too. It's great. You should bug him.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I know. He kind of disavows.
You're gonna have your head.
But he should. Yeah. Anyway, I'll bring you the manuscript. I'll find it somewhere in my.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. Anyway.
I love my job.
Well, we digress. Sorry.
No. This is so cool. But I got to tell our guests. So when Maestro brought Michael ABELS to us, I mean, I've gotten to work with Mark Russell Smith for a few years now, and he's one of the coolest people I know. And then he introduces me to this other guy, his childhood friend, who is every bit and maybe just a little cooler, because, what?
Tiny bit.
Hollywood.
Well, it's Hollywood. It's the Hollywood angle, right? It's the Hollywood. Your Hollywood day is coming, Maestro. Don't worry. Jannina and Tommy, I'm not sure if you are aware of a piece by Michael ABELS named Liquefy, which was a commission of the Quad City Symphony Orchestra. But I want you to tell us and share with us your excitement about Delights and Dances. Now, I've only seen this on YouTube performances, right? And it is so cool. But tell us, and maybe if I could, Jannina, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll get to Tommy. Tell us a little bit about what do you find that is attractive about this work?
It's just so much fun to play. It really is. It has kind of a multitude of influences of style, and I would say sort of like the blues jazz style is in there, and it kind of the blues is sort of in a funky. Danceable way. I mean, it's called Delights and Dances after all. But then each of the instruments is really like treated as a soloist, and you could imagine yourself with all the solo lines really improvising. And I think it's definitely kind of a throwback to some great jazz musicians and the way that they would contour a line. But it's just, you get sort of your own features, and then you get to sort of play and interact with everybody else. And then you get to have these, amazing danceable moments. So it truly lives up to its name of delights and dances, I think.
Tommy, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's, it is the title. It's so dancey, it's so delightful, and like you really feel like you can like sink into it and really excite an audience with like the sound, with the solos and everything. And then together as an ensemble, you could sort of like get into a groove a lot of the time, and it's kind of infectiously joyful, which I love about the piece. And it starts in a very unexpected way too. Like it's very reflective, and it sort of unfolds with this, first it's a cello solo, and then the viola joins. And then at the end of that, everyone sort of like joins a little bit at the end, and then it sort of bridges into the bluesy section with all the solos. And you do sort of feel like you're, I mean, it's still orchestral, but you sort of feel like you're in this like, jazz bar, and like there's a jazz orchestra in front of you, and like everyone's taking their turn doing the solos, like typical, like, late night New York jazz club or something. It's really like a lot of fun to play.
Maestro?
Well, look, joy. I mean, Michael Abel's music, almost all of it that I know, he's a joyful guy deep down, and it's reflected in his music. I mean, and especially in this piece, I am a terrible improviser on the cello. I mean, like so bad. But what he does, what I think he's so good at, is like he can go between styles like so virtuosically. And like if I need a lick, for some improv thing, I just like he's written it out. I mean, that's the genius of it. It sounds like, just like Jannina said, I mean, these great jazz licks that he somehow figures out how to notate and how to communicate to us lame people who read notes only. I'm talking about myself. But it's like, I mean, it's like great improvs written out. And he has such a keen ear. I mean, this is even as a, as a young composer. I mean, he was so facile going from this style to that style, for this film or that. He can make like a Baroque, he can make Baroque sounding, or like Renaissance, or he can make he did a bunch of gospel arrangements. When I was assistant conductor of the Phoenix Symphony, our hometown, he did a bunch of arrangements for this incredible gospel choir, and just like made it pop. I mean, he's so skilled instrumentally and orchestrationally. It's just, I mean, it's amazing. And it's like, I'm so in awe of his talent, because I just can't do that. I can do other things, but that's one thing I can't do. And so I don't know. It's just joyful and incredibly fun. And he's also a musical psychologist. I mean, like Tommy said, I mean, there's kind of ruminating at the beginning. There's kind of like, or like the first violin like has a little idea, and it's like, oh, and then like it sounds on, they're like, come on guys, I mean, like the musical psychology is so infectious,
Is he going to be able to be there at the performance?
I doubt it. I'm trying, man. I'm gonna try to twist his arm.
I mean, the personal connection also, right. Like I just love that we're doing this with you, because you know him so well and you go back. Right. I mean, like, not having them there, at least we have, his childhood friend who like knows all of those like dark corners.
Oh, I have some good stories. We'll have some good stories. And there's some good there's good Mexican food in the Quad Cities.
Oh, very good.
So, So
anyway,
exactly.
So
I have first good stories. Good stories.
Well, now our guests have been you've been very generous with your time. But we'll be talking about improvisation. And Jannina, I'm so sorry, but I have to get your read on this, because you were part of a quartet that was commissioned by the Stephen Colbert television show to improvise a soundtrack to a 2016 presidential debate. And I've watched it, and I can't get my head around it. It's so amazing. One of my favorite comments was, this quartet appeared better prepared than one of the candidates. I'll let you fill in the blanks on that.
That could be.
How did you do that?
Public quartet. I mean, as I said earlier, improvisation is a big part of our musical language. And we just got this phone call one day. The Colbert Report was doing kind of different stuff for all the presidential debates back in 2016. And I think they had like Cats and not as exciting as the string quartet, I'm sure. I mean, I think the string quartet is the most exciting, but anyway, so they came to us, they literally Googled improvising string quartet and we came up. And so they called our manager and we're, they were like, what do you think? We're like, let's do it. And we were, in with their team the next day discussing how we're going to do it. And I think the biggest challenge was really that we couldn't use anything that wasn't in public domain, so like I wanted to use the Darth Vader theme, which we couldn't do that. So we had to, but we're a classical musician. So there's a lot of classical music that's in public domain and that we could so we came up with a kind of vocabulary of different themes that we wanted to use. And then we kind of, then we would just kind of improvise kind of a, background in different styles, we experimented with kind of like, different kinds of music and, and we just listen, we practiced with the previous debates and then we would just listen and follow each other's lead and it was a wild experience, but
it was extraordinary.
People seem to like it. I think the Washington Post said that we were the true winners of the debate. So
I agree. Well, listen, we still have a few other works on the program to talk about, but I can't thank you enough for spending a few minutes with us. We wish you safe travels to be in our midst, and I can guarantee you great food when you get here.
Yes.
No lie. Yeah. But thank you both very much. Maestro, don't you go anywhere.
I won't.
All the friends at home, I know that you are applauding now and joining me in thanking our guests, Jannina Norpoth and Tommy Mesa. Thank you very much.
Thanks guys.
Thanks for having us.
Great to see you. See you very soon.
We'll see you soon.
Very excited.
Yeah.
So now, Maestro, with a few minutes that we have, let's walk through this program. I gotta say, okay, you're starting with a work that every time I hear it, I feel like it's the first time I'm hearing it, and I don't know what the phenomenon is about that, but I love to watch symphonies perform the Appalachian Spring, especially in this sort of chamber, more intimate setting. There's something about the music. I don't know what it is, but all of the members of the ensemble seem much more animated during this work. I mean, it's very, they get physically into it, right? And especially when you've got this conversation between flute and clarinet and the bassoon. I mean, tell us about your encounters with this particular work, Appalachian Spring by Aaron Copland.
Well, for me, it's one of the great American works of art, and I put it up there, and I say that about one other piece, and that's Bernstein's West Side Story. I mean, Copland captured so much psychologically and sonically and stylistically, and I mean, it was the perfect piece at the moment. 1944, the war was starting to turn in a positive way for Americans, and the optimism. And it just captures somehow. It captures so beautifully the American spirit in a lot of, well, in so many ways. I mean, again, psychologically, the themes that he uses, the way chords sound, the way the piece moves. I mean, it's just a great piece. We are doing the original version. What Copland did was take the 13 instrument version, which is the original version, which is what won the Pulitzer Prize, which was what was premiered, because in World War II, there were big orchestras, I mean, everybody was off fighting the war or working for the war effort. And so like big orchestras were less of a thing during the war. And so Martha Graham wanted to create this piece and talk to her friend Aaron Copland. And so, okay, it was 13 instruments because that's kind of what was around, and that was what was doable, and that's what would fit on the stage of the Library of Congress where it was premiered. And so, I mean, many people love this smaller version, this chamber version. Copland expanded it for orchestra, and that's the one that people know more, and that's the one that I've done more. I mean, I love all the colors of the orchestra and having trumpets and trombones and percussion. Having all those different colors adds to it too. But now we boil it down to the essence of the piece, and so it's very intimate. And I would imagine this 13 instrument version with dancers is just And I mean, I wouldn't imagine. It is a very powerful statement, but kind of in a very intimate way.
And this is the first time the symphony has done this version, I understand, the chamber.
Is that right?
version. I believe it is. It's been done 4 times previously, once by you in 2010,
Right.
but this will be the first time for the chamber version. So thank you very much for bringing that to us.
Again, I mean, why, a big symphony orchestra wouldn't do this small version. I mean, there's, you have to, I mean, chamber orchestras do it. And, it's not uncommon to have the 13 instrument version, but like, why would a big orchestra do that when there's a big orchestra version, So
Sure.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
Well, we've talked a little bit about Michael ABELS, and I know it's just going to blow people away. It's going to be so cool. But
It's fun. It's
one
just
technical
fun.
question: you work with soloists all the time. How does an orchestra work with a quartet soloist? I mean, does that?
Well, they're self-contained, and they have their bit, and it's up to us to fit into how they're doing their bit. And that's exactly the way the piece is written also. I mean, it's just like they were saying, it's like in a jazz club, and we're laying down, I mean, we're the bass and drums, basically, and so we're laying down the rhythmic track for them to riff on, and some of the harmonies and stuff. And so it's very, and so the orchestra doesn't, that's the role the orchestra plays. The orchestra doesn't have the melody much. But the orchestra is integral, of course, but it's really us just providing this beautiful, not pillow, but this beautiful backdrop upon which they can create.
Okay, I'm sorry that we're giving short shrift, but I realize we had so much fun with them. We didn't leave ourselves a lot of time. But next we'll get to hear from Charles Ives, great American composer, and a work that, again, the first time we've done this fugue from his Symphony No. 4. Tell us what we should expect.
Well, Ives, this piece was put on because Ives is such a character. I mean, he's such a unique guy in the history of American music. And so, I mean, a lot of his pieces are just insane and super thorny and impossible to put together. I mean, he was not a pragmatist in any way. There is this one movement that is a fugue, and so it's written like a fugue, constructed in a certain way. And then there are themes, like American themes, hymn themes. There's, there are all sorts of kind of just little snippets of things like, I may recognize that. It sounds like a hymn I know, or this sounds like this song that I know, but it's nothing. It's never quite like super obvious, and so it's just a bit of funkiness, like that is in fugal form, and it's from one of the great characters in American music, and so it's put on there for that reason. We're balancing out old and new, and kind of deans. Like Ives is kind of one of the deans of American composers. Certainly Copland is, with these two contemporary composers as well. So I mean, that kind of creates the yin and the yang of the program.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear that work, but I'm just as excited to hear the final work on the program, Gabriella Lena Frank's Leyendas, an Andean Walkabout. So tell us a little bit about an introduction to this piece.
Well, it's originally for string quartet, and she's Peruvian and American, and I think she has some Middle Eastern. I mean, she's this incredible, brings just an incredible number of influences to her music. And so there's definitely some of the Peruvian kick. I've chosen 2 movements of it. Like I said, originally for string quartet, expanded now for string orchestra. And so, again, pairs really nicely with the ABELS, I think, because ABELS is Delights and Dances, but these are now more, South American or that influence, which the ABELS doesn't have. And so lively rhythmic dances, toe tapping, although there's some tricky rhythms here, so it may not be the toe tapping may not be quite as obvious, but she's just another great voice, modern voice in American music, and brings, again, all the influences of her life and music that she studied and music that she's lived with, and then really brings her own, her unique perspective to it. And so again, it's lively, and to find American pieces that have all that color and that verve and that drive that aren't for gigantic orchestra. That's the big challenge. And so, you know, if we have these two pieces, both the ABELS and the Frank are just string orchestra pieces. And so that is, I mean, a parallel thing there, but also, you know, one of the challenges to find music that reflects the energy that I was looking for with smaller forces.
Well, listen, I can't thank you enough. This season, for all of its challenges, has also been amazingly triumphant in a lot of ways. And so I want to take a moment to just give reverence to this wonderful season. I can't believe we're at Masterworks VI already, but to thank you for that. At the same time, say, I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person again and doing these little chats in front of the live audience.
Same.
All right. Well, for now, you've again been very generous with your time and your insights. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we bid adieu?
No, it's a fun program. We're gonna just have a great time. And of course, I'm very grateful to our audience, the live audience. You know, last time really was wonderful and responsive. And it's great to be in the same room with people again. And it's just, you know, it's gonna get better and better from here.
And friends, if you're watching this, I hope you can be there live, because when you see this take on Appalachian Spring, plus everything else, and I mean it, everything else, you're going to be so glad you were there in person to see this happen. For now, though, we want to add our thanks to Chris Connolly and Wells Fargo Advisors for making the Concert Conversation series happen, and to all of the wonderful folks at the Quad City Symphony Orchestra. Thank you. Maestro, thank you so much.
My pleasure. See you soon, Kai. Thanks.
We'll see you very soon.
Okay.